So hello, you wonderful citizens of the internet, and welcome to a bit of a waffle about being neurodivergent, CPTSD, and how that can often make you way too trusting and way too forgiving of the wrong people in later life. Like, I think it's interesting that when you think about people who've gone through rough experiences in early life and have ended up with CPTSD, often you think of them as being the kind who are very hypervigilant, like they're always suspicious of everyone else because they've been through so much bad shit that they're like, I'm waiting for you to prove that you're not an asshole. And a lot of people are like that. But I think when it comes to neurodivergent, particularly autistic people and CPTSD, sometimes this kind of goes the other way. And I saw a TikTok about this like weeks ago, and unfortunately I didn't save it, because what they were saying was that if you are young and your caregivers, your parents, are like not ideal, your kid brain will latch love onto those people anyway. Because if you were to be honest at that point as a kid and go, look, you are a terrible parent, fuck this, I'm going somewhere else. Well, you're too young to survive on your own. You wouldn't live. So your brain plays this trick on you whereby it forces you to love your caregivers, however awful they are, so that you've got a caregiver, however awful that caregiver is. But obviously when you grow up, this gives you kind of two routes of problems. The first one is that you're still going to be dealing with that really mixed, really confusing feeling about your caregivers, your parents, in that you're still going to feel like, why do I feel this crushing need to gain the respect of my parents, or to be shown love, or to be shown pride, when it's never going to happen? When look at the past, has it ever happened before? It's never going to happen. And also, why would I want that from someone who has been kind of shitty to me? But you do, because your brain has programmed it so hard into you that you still want love and validation and pride and all of these things from your parents. And that's a head fuck. But the really tricky thing is that it also spills over onto other people. Your brain has gotten used to loving on people who are not lovable, or who do not deserve love, and who are behaving in awful ways towards you. So you've gotten used to loving unlovable traits, basically. Tends to make you very, very trusting and very, very forgiving when it comes to even complete strangers. Like you tend to have a bit too much of the attitude of like, oh, there's always some good in everyone. Like for me, it's things like I don't think I've ever been one of those people who has celebrated when someone was given a really long jail term, for instance. Like, no matter how awful their crimes are, like there are people I can see, you need to be taken away from the rest of society. Like you need to be away. But at the same time, I can never celebrate someone being slapped in a really, really awful, violent, horrible institution for the rest of their life. Like I can't celebrate that because it's a human in pain, and it, like, so this trusting, forgiving thing, like, is really stupid. And I saw today this amazing post that explains a second reason why we as autistics are often way too forgiving and way too gullible and way too trusting after we've suffered traumas at the hands of other people. I do apologize for my botched screenshot of this. Don't worry, I'm about to read what it says because I have completely butchered this screenshot. So what Autistic Callum said was the autistic urge to not register red flags as red flags because you're used to people misinterpreting your harmless behaviors and you don't want to do that to anyone else. So you go overboard trying to find acceptable explanations for other people's unacceptable behavior. And this post just hit home so hard. I was like, I'm sorry, I've got to re-edit this video and insert it in here because it's perfect timing. I think one thing that we really, really hate as autistics, almost across the board, is being like misinterpreted and misunderstood, particularly when people think you have really horrible motivations when actually your motivations were completely straightforward, because we're very straightforward people. You know, we don't really like to lie. We're honest to a fault. You know, we tell the truth when we probably shouldn't. We're very straightforward. So when someone comes at us and assumes that we've had really dubious motivations for something and that we were lying and scheming and things like this, it's such a head fuck. I have seen so many TikToks about particularly neurodivergent people saying, like, I don't care about being insulted, insult me all you like, but if you don't believe me about something, I will burst into tears and run away screaming. Like, it's a really across the board experience. We hate not being believed. So when it comes to other people and their red flags and their explanations of their, like, the shitty things that they've done, oftentimes we will believe them and we will give them a second chance. The process of wising up as an autistic person, I think, takes you until you're probably in your 60s, honestly, to untangle living in a world of people whose motivations for doing things are so completely different to yours and whose worldview is so different to yours, and it's wild. But anyway, a huge round of applause to Autistic Callum for that post, because it's fucking brilliant. And with that added to this video, because I just thought it needed to be. Back to the video. And I'm sure it goes for people getting into bad relationships too, that, you know, if you're used to feeling love for people who ignore you or outright abuse you, like, that's going to be the thing that feels comfortable and familiar. And I think we all know by now our attachment style and the kind of relationships we go after, it tends to be whatever feels comfortable and familiar to us. And that can be a very bad thing, because not many of us really had completely stable, great, like, family relationships to look up to and to think, oh yeah, you know, this is the kind of stability I felt at home as a child. This is the kind of stability I want in my adult life. Also on the subject of CPTSD and autism, the other thing I've wanted to say for a really long time regards trauma and things that traumatize us as autistic people, and how, for starters, being traumatized in some way as a kid, if you're autistic, is pretty much guaranteed, because we are so different to other people. And also we're quite hypersensitive to a lot of things. You know, there's all the sensory stuff going on that is an overload for us. You know, there's the misunderstanding, there's the inevitable bullying and stuff, because neurotypical kids kind of just clock it immediately. This kid is weird. We're going to pick on them. We're going to make them the scapegoat. You have all these horrible experiences going on as an autistic person. But also I feel like our threshold for being traumatized is actually lower anyway. Or it can be all over the place. Like there can be some things that happen to us that other people would think that's really traumatic. And we won't be traumatized by it. But then other things happen to us that do traumatize the shit out of us. But then we have this double level of shame about, because we don't feel we can actually tell anyone about it, because it feels so minor. Like to when you try and say it out loud and what happened, you're like, I know people who've gone through way worse things than this. So how can I be traumatized by something this minor? And obviously one of the things you need with trauma and all of that is validation of, like, yes, that was awful. That was awful. You shouldn't have had to go through that. I wish you didn't have to go through that. How can I help you, kind of thing is kind of the basis of where you need to go from, I think. Even in just conversations with friends and stuff with trauma, you need that validation, and you feel you're never going to get that validation. If your trauma was like a weird one, it's and it's the fucking autism, it's the neurodivergence, it's the way you see life differently. And, like, you know, one thing that really traumatized me, without getting into the details of it or anything, there were a lot of elements in the things that I found traumatic. So one element was being trapped with this person, in all manner of ways, like physically trapped with this person in the room where it all happened, physically trapped with them, couldn't get out, but also physically trapped with them because my family were like miles away and I couldn't get to them. I wasn't being allowed to phone them. I was asking again and again and again to phone them. I was not allowed that. So there was like no contact, completely trapped. And you know, these things, like, taken by themselves don't sound like really like terrible things. But even the little things in your trauma tend to echo on down the line and affect you, because being trapped is one of my biggest things to this day. Being trapped is such a thing for me. When I went to university, it built up this fear of being trapped, because I knew, like, once I walk into that lecture, I'm stuck there for the next 3 hours, because I'm going to be too anxious to stand up and say, hey, I need to, like, go to the bathroom, I need to leave or whatever. So many days I would get up at 6-7 o'clock in the morning. I'd put on full makeup, I'd get dressed, I'd get in my car, I'd drive all the way to uni. I'd see the front door and I'd think, if you take one step through that front door, someone's going to see you and they're going to start ushering you into class. And the minute you're in class, you are trapped there for 3 hours. And the fear just got bigger and bigger and bigger until I would eventually just spin my car around and drive home. And, I'd completely gotten ready. I'd gone there. I was on time and I couldn't make myself walk through the door. And I think so much of it does date back to this particular incident. And obviously then you have the compound trauma. If you do talk about traumas that are like autistic traumas, that, it's hard to describe to a neurotypical person why you felt so trapped, or why, the heat and the light and the sounds and the smells were all just getting too much. Or, any other elements that made it so traumatic for you, but maybe not for a neurotypical person. You try and explain that stuff and they just go, oh, you're so sensitive. I'll just get over it. Things like that. It's going to be that. And you know what? I am actually now remembering I fucking did tell a therapist about that incident. When I was 14, I had my first therapist. She came pretty close to working out what had happened. So I gave them the cliff notes, and maybe I explained real badly. Maybe I did. Maybe I just explained really badly. But I'm pretty sure that woman and my mum, who was also in the room, they laughed it off. I mean, okay, they had expected that it was going to be something like horrendously awful, and it wasn't that. So maybe it was a bit of relief, but they laughed it off. So that was why I was like, okay, well, that's just stuff it down in the trash bag, stuff your feelings down, don't talk about them, keep on turning all that self-hatred inwards and hurting yourself and all the rest of it, because clearly that's working so well, and clearly that's all you're going to get out of therapy if therapists are like this. Unfortunately, I have met therapists since who are better about trauma than this, or maybe I'm better at explaining what it was that traumatized me so much about this thing. But I think my last therapist was better about this. She did want to kind of dig through my past and go through it. But at this point, I was just so jaded to being upset by therapists. Unfortunately, the UK on the NHS, you can't get things like EMDR therapy, DBT, all these things that I think would be useful for me. You can't get them on the NHS. So that's a whole other adventure for another time. But yeah, the difficulties of being a autistic or neurodivergent person who has some level of CPTSD, and the way that it makes you believe in the good in everyone, because you've had to see your parents as good, even if objectively many times they were not. Now I find it very hard to see anyone as wholly bad, which is dangerous, because there are people in the world who are wholly bad. You do end up with certain shitty people kind of circling your life, and you've given them chance after chance after chance, because that's just what you're like and what you're used to as well. If you are used to some kind of like not super involved upbringing and all of that, then you're used to not being given reliable, regular attention. You're used to this kind of like, oh, they'll bother me with me when they feel like bothering with me, and if it's weeks or months before they next bother with me, well, that's how things go, isn't it? That's what normal life is. There's just so many things I could say about this, because it's such a thing. And it's crazy, because like my childhood was not even like awful, not, by the standards of many people, but that if you're autistic as well, your brain really, 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 really can't cope with quite a lot of negative situations that neurotypical brains might just breeze over. Anyway, if you have stories about how your childhood has maybe made you a little bit too trusting? Or are you on the other side and actually you're one of the autistic people who has the superpower that I envy so hard, which is the pattern recognition, whereby you can meet someone and cold read them immediately and just know, right, this is what you're like, these are your problems, this was what your childhood was like, this is what you're going to be to me. Are you going to be nice? Are you going to be an asshole? And you just turn around and walk away if you cold read them bad. Like, there are some autistics like that. They just lock onto someone and they know all their secrets. And I wish I had that superpower, because I am so gullible about people and I am so unobservant, and I don't have that superpower at all. So yes, where do you come on the spectrum of all of this? Are you really hypervigilant, or are you one of the people who got fucked in the head by this whole like, oh, this is my parent, my caregiver, they're kind of doing terrible things, but I have to love them anyway. So now I see someone awful and I think I should love on them too, because my brain is soup. I don't know, tell me things. Are you one of those too? Yeah, so I will leave you to waffle your waffles below. Thank you for listening. Over and out. Bye-bye.